Once again, it's on
1690 WVON.
It is Sunday night, and you know it is time for the best sports show on the radio, for sure. I am Maya Akai, the sports chica, holding it down. But tonight I am not actually solo. Get to that in a moment. Remember, if you'd like to join the conversation via Facebook and Twitter, you can always go to @the Sports Cypher, and that's Cypher with a Y. Or you can go to the Sports Chica and tweet directly to me as well, and I'll get you in. If you have something you want to say, you want to join the conversation, 773-591-1690. So, as you heard, we opened up with a clip with LeBron, which this week was all about NBA free agency. Definitely. In the second hour at 10 o'clock, at 10:05, in fact, Brian Crawford's going to join me to talk about the Bulls as well as NBA free agency. At 9:40, Sydney Brown, who is a Blackhawks and AHL writer for We Are Regal Radio, will tell us about the Blackhawks off-season moves. But to start the show out, I have an in-studio guest, Gabe Salgado. Welcome, Dave.
Well, thank you.
So you're a freelance sports writer for Sportstown Chicago, correct?
Well, I don't write for them. I do contribute to some of their talk shows, but I freelance for a bunch of different outlets. Follow me on Twitter at Gabe Salgado82. I post everything there. I also link you to my Facebook and LinkedIn pages as well. So once you find me on Twitter, I'm not that hard to find.
Right. Once you find somebody on Twitter, pretty much there you go, and all your work is always posted there as you do it. Good stuff. So pretty much the World Cup has been going on for a while, and I do believe, I would say in the U.S., it probably has gotten way more traction than I've ever known it to get. And obviously, the final is there. Germany wins the World Cup, and it seems like that's quite controversial because they did it on South American soil from right here, and I heard that the Brazilians were not very happy about that.
Well, they were happy that Argentina lost because they hate Argentina more than probably anything else. But, definitely something that, the Brazilian government spent like almost $12 billion to host the World Cup. And, once they got to the semifinals, the Brazilian national team, everybody was thinking, okay, well, now it's our chance. We're going to win the title. We're going to prove that the government did right by, reaching out and bidding to host this event. Then Neymar gets injured, and then, the embarrassing semifinal loss against the Netherlands. And, now granted, they didn't have Neymar, and they didn't have Thiago Silva because he was suspended. Neymar was injured with a fractured vertebrae. So that kind of really hurt them as their best offensive player and their best defensive player right there. But in reality, Brazil is a young team. Long gone are the days of Ronaldo and Ronaldinho and Kaká and those guys that, really built the team for what it is during the 90s and the early 2000s. But now you have a bunch of, new young talent that's in there. Now, they've done pretty good so far. I mean, obviously, the World Cup doesn't get bigger than that in soccer, but they won the silver medal at the 2012 Olympics. They won the last two Confederations Cups. They've really been able to hold their own with this young team, and they just need a little more development, a little more seasoning, but this year they kind of caught a tough break.
It's interesting because Farouk and I used to go back and forth about, soccer being that sport. Can it really get traction here in the United States and really have people get on board? Like I said, for me, this is the first time that I have truly noticed the World Cup. From, seeing the commercials from McDonald's to cell phone companies. I mean, it's everywhere you looked. It was really being promoted. But to me, I said, when it's all said and done, I don't know that it's ever going to have the love affair that Americans have, like, for instance, with football, baseball, basketball. Like, that's our big three. Now, I'm not saying that I think soccer can't be popular, but here's one thing I noticed in watching the World Cup. And actually, I did watch quite a bit of it, considering I know nothing really about soccer. But I was kind of intrigued by it. I was like, this is actually, because when I look at the Fire, nothing against the Fire, just the level of play didn't, to me, look like what I saw on those fields when I watched those games.
Right.
So occasionally I may catch something like the English Premier League, which I think you said is on NBC Sports.
Right.
And I look at those games, and I'm like, that looks nothing like the MLS here.
Well, the biggest issue for MLS is a lot of the players in that league are homegrown here in the United States, and just like you said, it's not very popular. Very few high school and college teams have soccer teams in this country, so that kind of plays a part in it as well. And, the MLS has only been around since 1996 or 97, so, essentially it's still in its infancy compared to, like, the English Premier League and the Mexican League and La Liga in Spain and, all the European leagues and things of that nature. And, and it's amazing because you take a look at the English Premier League. Here in America, they actually get a pretty decent audience on NBC Sports Network, considering all those games are on at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning because of the time difference. But, MLS, they're starting to get better. If you really want a good example, the Chicago Fire, their attendance does pretty well. It's a 16,000 seat stadium. They easily get 13,000 a game.
Trailer Park, that's in
Bridgeview.
Mm-hmm.
They have a very passionate fan base, and the Fire's always done a pretty good job of reaching out, to the Latin demographic and the urban demographic as well to get the soccer fans to come out, and it's pretty much paid off. As far as like MLS on a worldwide stage, it's apples to oranges, right? They're two completely different levels of soccer, obviously. But over the last few years, Major League Soccer, they've brought international stars. Granted, it's towards the end of their careers, like David Beckham with the LA Galaxy, right, or Thierry Henry right now with the New York Red Bulls. He's starting to get up there towards the twilight of his career as well. But just bringing in that international appeal, and now with David Beckham trying to bring an MLS franchise to Miami, that international appeal is starting to come there. And, now it's more sponsorship, as evidenced by, sponsorship logos on the uniforms as opposed to the team logos now. But, definitely, I think also the internet and social media have really helped the growth of the sport here in the United States. I mean, you take a look at Team USA's run during this year's World Cup. You take a look at all the viewing parties that they had across the country, more particularly here in Grant Park in Chicago. The internet and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube have just been really driving and getting that message out to get new fans and to get the old fan base to come out. So it's really been a huge marketing tool, and it's helped the sport grow. It's still not the level it needs to be up on par with football and baseball and all that, but it's getting there, and it's a very positive sign.
Well, it's definitely one of those sports that I do see more and more younger children are starting to play. I see more soccer leagues, whether it be to the Park District and Appendix. There's traveling teams. So I mean, it's definitely to me that's probably the next big step. Is the more kids you get invested in playing, then obviously that fan base will grow. Exactly,
and that's the case with any country that has soccer. It's you got to start them young. Other sports you could probably get away with starting in your teenage years, but soccer, because of the fundamentals involved and the level of skill it takes to play. I mean, to the untrained eye, it looks like they're just out there kicking a ball and not really much to it. But there's a whole lot of technique and body positioning and everything that goes into it. I mean, it's a completely different animal.
From watching the World Cup, clearly,
definitely,
there's a lot of technique that goes into that. So by no means I ever think it's out there people just run around kicking a ball. No.
Definitely.
Tons of technique. And like I said, the talent level that I noticed from other countries, not to say that the Americans weren't good, and I have to say, I do believe that the Americans being the underdog in this, it kind of rallied the people in the country to be a bit more interested.
Definitely.
Do you think they went a lot further than people anticipated that they would?
Well, I think they probably did about as well as expected. They've only went to the quarterfinals once, and that was back in 2002. And that was before they had the big following. That was when people were just starting to take notice of Team USA. I think that now, they probably could have made it to the quarterfinals or beyond. Jurgen Klinsmann's definitely, made some changes, from a fundamental standpoint. Although when they did get to the round of 16, they did kind of slack in certain areas against Belgium, but I think that was, more fatigue than anything else. But it's definitely good to see the sport growing, and it's definitely good to see the changes that are being implemented. And plus, also with this year's team, they had a few more MLS players on their roster as opposed to normally they're getting Tim Howard, for example, plays in Europe. A lot of the U.S. players over the years have played in Europe and other leagues around the world, but now they have they're adding more MLS players now, which is definitely a good thing. And I think that, the more that you can get, the homegrown league involved on the worldwide stage, it'll definitely help the growth of the sport. And you take a look at, the big influence that club football has on the international stage. When you take a look at, for example, Lionel Messi of Argentina, he plays for, I think it's, is it Real Madrid? No, it's Barcelona. It's Barcelona that he plays for in Spain. Neymar from Brazil, he plays in Spain. And, Chicharito from Mexico, Javier Hernandez, he plays in England in the Premier League. So, it's really helped, the sport by, blending in the club football with the international football. And if MLS can integrate themselves more into that, I think it'll definitely help the growth of the league here in the States.
In studio with me is Gabe Salgado, who is co-hosting the show. So he'll be here throughout the duration of the night, giving us the best insight into World Cup that you will ever get on the Sports Cypher, because I'll be honest, this is a new learning curve for me, and it did pique my interest, I will say. Watching the few games that I watched, I was like, you know what, this is actually probably pretty intense. And what I think is that if I actually probably attended a few games in person, it might draw me in because that's how I became a hockey fan. Is that I went to a game and I was like, oh, this is awesome. It's great. I mean, the energy. Let me just say this, too. When you talk about fandom, when you say fanatic, I now think of soccer fans.
Oh, you can't help but to think that way. I implore you to check out a Chicago Fire game when you get the chance. On the north end of the stadium is probably where the biggest fan base is, and they're the ones with the noisemakers and the horns and the drums and really just getting everybody throughout the stadium riled up. I mean, sitting up in the press box, you can't help but feel the energy, but at the same time, you gotta be neutral because as a member of the press, you're supposed to be. But at the same time, you would love nothing more than to cheer, along with the fans because the energy is just a whole other level there.
Well, I know I remember seeing stories like this throughout the years about how soccer fans would get into altercations. There were a couple times I think where people died, and I was like, it's a soccer game. People are very intense about it.
A lot of that happens in Europe.
Yes.
And a little bit, very little in South America. You don't see a whole lot of that here in North America. Not just saying that it can't happen, hopefully it won't, but, over the years, you don't hear about it as much because security at these games has improved because, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that take this sport to heart. They take it so deep to heart that, they let their emotions get the best of them, and yes, they do wind up doing stupid things, especially if there's alcohol involved. But,
right.
Over the years, that's calmed down a lot, which is a good thing. It's helped the sport.
So, moving forward, so obviously World Cup's over, Germany wins, but from what I understood, they were clearly a team that was designed to win, that they played pretty well throughout the entire tournament, which, by the way, seems to be a very elaborate tournament in the World Cup. I've never seen anything like that. I almost feel like I was watching the Olympics.
It feels like it. I mean, it only happens every 4 years.
So it's just how everything was organized, and there was all these different matches, and there was different stadiums. I mean, I thought you build one stadium and everybody plays in that stadium. No, they had 3 different stadiums going on, which I guess is good for Brazil because they are hosting the Olympics. So for them, this is helping them to ramp up to getting prepared for the Olympics. Now they have 3 stadiums that they've actually built.
Definitely.
So in that sense, it does give them that one thing, to be. And that's actually something too. I'm surprised, or maybe it's just here that soccer doesn't seem like it's that big in the Olympics.
Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that way. It doesn't seem the way. You're right, and I think it's because when you think Olympics, because you have basketball there in the Summer Olympics, that really takes precedence over any other sport. And also with the other sports like track and field and things of that nature. But as far as Olympic soccer goes, they don't use FIFA rules. They use IOC rules when they play Olympic soccer, so it's a little different. And I believe the format's a little bit different, and the way you qualify, I'm not too sure on either. But, definitely the World Cup is on a bigger stage than the Olympic soccer itself. Yes,
because it seems like you barely hear a peep about it. But this turned out to be a very interesting World Cup. Like I said, I'm not necessarily a fan, but they piqued my interest, and I'm definitely going to check out some of the Fire games since I can obviously get a press pass. I might as well go check them check it out, and get a good feel for it. Even though I feel like I'm going to not feel like the level of play is what I saw, but it's probably still good. It's probably still very good.
I encourage you to do it. I mean, I've done it for last couple of years, and just like you said, it's not on par with the rest of the leagues around the world, but it's still fun. It's still enjoyable. I mean, it's definitely, just to see the passionate fan base that exists here in Chicago, which a lot of people, didn't think really existed or don't know exists outside of the state of Illinois. I mean, it's just amazing.
Landon Donovan, why did he not make the team? Is my last question on this. Just not good enough? Did Clemson think he wasn't going to be able to contribute?
I think what had happened was Landon Donovan last year had took about 4 months of leave time, citing exhaustion. And I definitely think that was valid because playing for the LA Galaxy and playing for Team USA and doing all that at roughly the same time, because when they weren't doing, qualifiers and they weren't doing tournaments and they weren't doing World Cups, they're still playing international friendlies on top of his club team. And I think he just needed a break. And I kind of think that Jurgen Klinsmann held that against him. And there's also the fact, Donovan's getting up there in age. He's 33 now, I want to say, which is old for soccer. And, I just think it was also, 2 different styles, just clashing, from a fundamental standpoint. I do believe that if Donovan was still on the team, I think the United States would have done better offensively. Mm-hmm. But, overall, it was more, of a philosophical difference between the two at the end of the day. I mean, it wasn't a popular decision. And I completely agree with the fans who weren't in support of that decision either. But at the end of the day, Jurgen Klinsmann has to put who he thinks are the best 23 players on the team on the world stage, because, any World Cup game could be your last, and, one bad loss can really get you fired from the job. And, Klinsmann's only been on the job for 2.5 years.
So he definitely had to make a statement with what he's doing in this World Cup.
And especially since he's trying to turn around the program of U.S. soccer, which really, over the years, they're still struggling to compete with the rest of the world in some senses.
Makes sense. Well, that is our World Cup talk, which you finally got it. You were asking for it, and I had someone great in studio to do it for me, Gabe Salgado. This is a Sports Cypher. Stay tuned. We come back talking Cubs and White Sox.
Back to the best sports show on the radio, the Sports Cypher.
Welcome back to the Sports Cypher. I'm Maya Akai, the Sports Chica. We just wrapped up talking some World Cup. I know for the people out there that are not World Cup people, I was getting gripes from people on Facebook and Twitter. You never talk about the World Cup. So since Gabe Salgado is in the studio with me and he knows all about the World Cup, I was giving fair opportunity to the people who like soccer. So we are done with that, even though Malcolm, who is my technical producer, wanted to chime in on something in regards to the World Cup. What do you want to say, Malcolm?
I went to Soldiers Field. When they had 30,000 people out there. 30,000 people out there. And I said I wanted to experience the soccer experience. So I was sitting next to this Latino gentleman who explained the game to me. Because, like she said earlier, I was just like totally in the dark about why they were kicking this ball around, because I'm a football guy. I love football. So he explained to me that's why it's such a high when they score, because it doesn't happen that often. So, I brought the Chica a scarf from Soldiers Field.
Yes, you did. Very nice scarf, too. Very, very festive. Very festive here.
That's all I had to say. It was wonderful.
Well, good stuff. See, I think that's a good way to build a fan base, is by doing small things like that to help people get involved. So. And
the best part about it is here in Chicago, because you have so many different cultures in one city. You can get the fans to come out who may already be familiar with the game and, blend them in with the people who are unfamiliar with the game. And that was the great part about the viewing parties. And, yeah, originally they started in Grant Park, but they became so popular and so many people were showing up, they had to move it to Soldier Field. There were so many people.
Well, it seems like, a lot of people had a vested interest and it went well. So, like I said, I caught a couple games. I mean, next year I'd be a little bit more invested and check out a Fire game. But I still have a lot to learn. Another sport I have to learn. Go figure. Anyways, so let's wrap that up. And remember I said at 9:40, Sidney Brown will be on. He is a NHL Blackhawks writer for We Are Regal Radio, giving us an off-season update, what the Blackhawks have been doing. And they've been doing some stuff. Obviously, we had some contract extensions. We've got some rumors going around about maybe potential players being let go. So definitely, as this season ended, a lot of heartbreak to be so close to being in the Stanley Cup final. But it'll be curious because I think LA is a huge contender. So what they're doing in the off season is big. So Sidney Brown is going to join us to kind of fill us in on what's been going on with that too. And since we have a little bit of time before we bring Sidney on, I was debating if I was going to talk baseball because it's generally very painful, Gabe, to talk baseball right about now in Chicago because there's just not a lot going on.
Right.
But we're about to hit the All-Star break, which means teams are going to get to relax. Obviously, Sale made the cut, and he should have. He should never even have gotten to that point.
I agree. He should have been on the initial roster from the get-go.
From the get-go. I was like, how does that? I mean, it's such a popularity contest, I swear. That should have never happened. So Anthony Rizzo from the Cubs and Sale do make the cut and are in the All-Star game representing their respective teams. So, one thing I always say about baseball specifically is no matter how bad you're slumping at the beginning of the season, it's a very long season. Now, granted, you don't want to fall so far into the hole that, you're climbing out. But, going into the break, let's talk first about, let's say, the Cubs, since that'll be a short conversation. I'm just saying. People get mad at me about ragging on the Cubs all the time. But here's the thing. So they moved Samardzija.
Right.
Which I looked at that move and I said, well, the week before I said, that was a rumor that was going around. But the rumor was that the White Sox could maybe entertain that conversation. And I was like, I'm thrilled about that idea because put him in your, in your pitching rotation, and that just makes the White Sox that much better. Didn't happen. Instead, he goes to the A's.
It seems like, an automatic decision, definitely on the White Sox part. But the issue with that is that the Cubs are looking for, more minor league prospects, especially pitching prospects. And for the time being, the White Sox really don't have much to give as far as trades go. Mm-hmm. And really, their starting rotation is pretty much set. It's their bullpen that needs help.
Yeah.
But the problem is, they're not going to be buyers at the trade deadline simply because they don't really have a whole lot to give at this point. So I expect the White Sox, maybe they'll probably shake it up by bringing up some of the AAA guys to throw in the bullpen. But definitely at the end of the season, they'll be looking to improve relief pitching. And that'll definitely be a mission of the offseason. I don't really see them making too many deals with the trade deadline this year.
I don't see it either, because I think in the back of the organization's mind, if they don't feel like they are truly in contention, and we had talked about this before the show started, that pretty much when you talk about coming out of the AL Central, it's called you're winning the division for the White Sox. That's the only road that leads you to the playoffs.
Definitely.
Because the wild card is not coming out of the AL Central.
It's not.
It's just not. So for them, it's pretty much you needed to win the division. And when you're looking up at the likes of Detroit, Cleveland, and a lot of times even Kansas City, it's not highly likely you're going to make a playoff appearance.
Right.
So with that being said, do they go out and make those kind of investments, and get somebody in free agency or in the market when they know they're not going to be making a postseason appearance?
Rick Hahn, general manager, said at the beginning of the season he would be surprised if the White Sox made the playoffs this year. So he obviously knew what the expectations were realistically coming in. They've obviously, fixed the issues that they had with the position players, although I don't see Adam Dunn sticking around too much longer. He'll probably, he'll play through his contract and they'll let him go. As much as, the White Sox would like to move him and get that salary off the books, nobody wants to take on that salary.
Right.
But other than that, now it's just, they got to focus on the bullpen. The starting rotation, as long as everybody stays healthy, is pretty solid. Like you said, Chris Sale, it's a crime that he was left off the initial American League roster. John Danks, he's slowly getting back to form after having that shoulder surgery. Jose Quintana, he goes out there, 7-8 innings every start, mm-hmm. Gives them no more than a run or two. So, he's definitely been solid. And, you take a look at, the amount of innings that the starters pitch, easily 6-7 innings, a night. Mm-hmm. So, but then the problem is the bullpen comes in and they just can't hold it down. So that's the big area of weakness right now for the White Sox, and that's pretty much been a weakness that you noticed from the beginning of the season.
Well, but exactly. They came into the season knowing that they didn't have a solid closer or even a decent bullpen out there. That's the first thing I find a little disturbing. We all know that the closer by committee didn't work last year, and it wasn't going to work this year.
Originally, they were looking to Matt Fortin to be the closer. Then he got hurt.
Right.
Then they were looking at Nate Jones. Then he got hurt. And then from there, it's pretty much been a revolving door.
But ask yourself this question. If it was really Nate Jones, did you really feel good about that?
Not particularly,
Okay,
no.
Exactly. So, once again, you still had a huge question mark about who is your closer. It was never going to be Nate Jones, even if he could stay healthy or, they thought he was going to be that guy. That was being delusional to me because I was never really, matter of fact, most of the time he'd walk out there, I'd get nervous. I'm like, here we go. So there was nothing about seeing him as being the closer that made sense to me. So what's disappointing about this organization, and I think it's fair that Rick Hahn pretty much set the table for you so you would know what not to expect for the season, which would be a playoff run. Okay, fine. So it's either you're looking at this as a season that you're getting some good development for players. I mean, obviously, Abreu has been the highlight. And when you talk about being Rookie of the Year, if he keeps at this pace, how can he not be?
And the amazing thing is, even after he had that sit on the disabled list with the bad ankle, he came up and didn't miss a beat. First at bat, gets a home run, and the investment that they made in him, that's already starting to pay off.
Yes. Yes.
He just needs to stay healthy.
Yes.
He just needs to stay healthy and just make sure that off the field, he stays out of trouble and, just stays focused on his game. I know that there was a lot of concern about, how well he would hit considering he's never gone through the minor league system. They give him a $68 million contract, go, hey, you're going to be our first baseman opening day, even though you don't even speak English yet. So, he just leaps and bounds beyond expectations that anybody had of him this year.
And I will say this. Even though we know that Paul Konerko will not be in a White Sox uniform come next year, which is fine. That time was coming. I do like the fact that they tried to pair him with Abreu for some tutelage, some mentoring, to kind of help him make that transition, at first base. To me, that was a smart move to make. It makes a lot of sense. You're getting the most out of it, and Konerko gets to, pretty much end his career here if that's what he chooses that he's going to do. So that's one move I liked. Development-wise, you have to look at Abreu and say this. Unlike kind of the small development curve that you had to get with Piazza, even Vesieto, you didn't get that with Abreu. He came in he was ready to go.
The thing is, too, is that he's very aggressive at the plate, so every now and then he still has a tendency to chase a bad pitch. But, you're going to get that from a guy who's used to batting close to 300 and hitting the way he does with all those home runs and RBIs. The guy was just a monster down in the Cuban leagues, even though there isn't really a whole lot of information available about that because, the political situation there. But, just the type of numbers that he put up, just give you even a remote idea of what he's capable of if you can get him in the major leagues. And now, you can see what he's doing. And I think that, if he stays healthy and if he keeps producing the type of numbers that he's producing, he could be a regular all-star every year. He could be an MVP candidate. So it's definitely something worth watching and definitely things that White Sox fans shouldn't take for granted.
When I look at this team, and here's where I stand for both sides of town. Granted, everybody knew that the Cubs were clearly a rebuilding project. Even though the length of time that Theo Epstein's contract is 4 or 5 years, he's not going to get it done. So what I'll be curious as an organization, so we'll kind of switch back and talk a bit about the Cubs, is what do they expect for him to get accomplished in that term of a contract? Because pretty much they have sold off all pieces there was to have of having a decent team. They're young. They always have invested in their farm system, which is a plus, something that the White Sox are very deficient at. So they've always invested in their farm system. But for me, if I have to give Theo Epstein a grade, if you had to give him a grade, what would you give him right now? Because it's a rebuild team, but do you see the direction and the progress that you would expect given the time he's been there?
I'd have to give Theo a C- only because the dividends are slowly starting to pay off with the developmental players. And you see that they've had Alcantara up for the last couple of games, and he's done okay. And just, the progress that guys like Chris Bryant and Javier Baez and those guys have been making down on the farm system. Every week you hear they're getting promoted, they're getting elevated, they're putting up all these type of numbers. So I give them a C- for the fact that, so far those dividends are slowly starting to pay off with the minor league system. Now, if you could just get them up to the major league level, give them to Wrigley Field, put them out there in front of the Ivy and see how they perform, then maybe you can get a better grade from there. My hope is that before Epstein's contract finishes up, that the Cubs could get at least one playoff appearance before then. Whether that'll happen, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up, but
I'm sure they're realistic on this.
I would hope that you could at least get one just to see that maybe the fruits of Theo's labor is slowly starting to pay off.
Is this year 3?
Year 2 or 3, something around there.
But see, here's part of the problem with that. You're right. Part of what would be if I have to give you a grade, or if I have to say progress-wise where you're going, then to me, and this is maybe just me being very one-sided about this, it's great you have a good development system in the farm. I love that. That's awesome. But it's what you just said. It's like you have to get them up in front of the Ivy and see how they play, because you could be fantastic in the farm system and then make it up to the majors, and it just doesn't translate the same. So, yes, it's good you're developing. If you can get anything homegrown, you can appreciate that. But it's about what happens when they get on the big stage. So even with that, there's still no guarantee with all these good young players in a farm system that it translates to we can get you to the postseason. And I'm like, a youth movement is good, but at the same time, you do need a fair balance of some veterans, some leadership to kind of help you carry through.
And that's why they're pushing for this renovation project, because they say that the money that they'll get from that with the new advertising will help them, more money in the baseball operation, so they can go out and get those veterans to mix in. Because I believe the same way you do, that you got to have, a couple of big name veterans there, because all the young guys, even if they gel together, having a bunch of 23, 24, 25-year-old guys isn't going to get it done on its own. I completely agree with that.
It's like watching the Kane County Cougars. It's just not good enough when you talk about what you're going to ask people to pay to fill the stadium, even though Cub fans do it regardless. They, a very loyal fan base, considering that they've had 100+ years of disappointment. But it gets back to you have to find some veteran players to put on that team with them for some balance. And then I look at pitching, I'm like, there's just a lot of holes, and I don't know in the next 2 years how much of that he can truly remedy to say, do we now give you a contract extension? Because if you do, my question would be this. Let's say they don't make a playoff appearance. And let's say you do bring up some of your minor league players and they're good, but let's say they don't ever crack and have an 80-season, year. How do you willingly extend a contract to who was the wonder kid coming out of Boston, but understand the situation in Boston that Theo Epstein came from was nothing like it was here?
Right.
So people shouldn't be a little too pretentious about assuming that he could work magic like he did in Boston, because they weren't quite as, desolate.
When he got to Boston, they already had a solid team on the field.
Yeah.
He just basically put the finishing touches on the team that was already good and got 2 World Series championships out of it. Obviously here, they're basically telling them come here, and they're basically, you're taking a canvas. You take down the original painting, and now you're doing a completely new painting on it, and you want to sell that painting for millions of dollars, and that's basically what they're expecting Theo Epstein to do. As to how realistic it is for him to do that, we'll find out sooner rather than later. But, yeah, I mean, the completely different situation in Boston. Totally
exactly.
agree with you.
It's like a lot of times people have a very short-term memory about what really goes into being successful. It's kind of like how you hear when Tony Dungy left the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Gruden steps in, and pretty much wins the Super Bowl. There's just thought all of a sudden that Gruden is this fantastic coach. Don't get me wrong, he's a good coach, but understand the team that he won with was a team that was assembled by Tony Dungy. So I think when you look at the situation, specifically when you talk about Boston, which really is the reason that Theo Epstein is here, is the success he had in Boston. People also have to realize that team was already pretty much, like you said, constructed. So to me, you have to use a whole different set of benchmarks for him of what you feel like he should be achieving. The Ricketts should be like, each year we should have benchmarks that we feel like things should be happening that are moving us in the right direction. My question is, do they really have that in place to really be able to figure out? I mean, you've gone now through, 2 different managers. The question is, do you finally have the right fit in Renteria, which I do like that hire. I did like that, so I don't think that's an issue. But the question is, the talent is there and it's young, but you don't have the balance. So to me, I'm looking at Epstein and I'm saying they better figure out what they're grading him on.
They're hoping that Rizzo and Castro could provide that balance. I'd like to think they can, but when you take a look at how badly those two played last year,
yes.
Now granted they turned things around this year, but who's to say, by the time August comes around, both of them go through another 2 for 20 slump. So there's no guarantee that those guys can yet provide that balance. They're hoping that's the case. I will say this, as far as, how much longer Epstein will stay here in Chicago, it'll definitely be through the process of them finishing the renovations on Wrigley Field whenever that gets started. So I definitely think that, Epstein will stick around for at least another couple seasons or however long it takes him to get that renovation job done. But they have an idea of what they want to do, and it's slowly starting to work. But, I mean, just every day that fan base, God bless them, their patience is being tested on a daily basis. And, and just think about it, they got a new radio deal because the radio station they were with for years was losing money off of it because the team had gotten so bad. So now you're putting that pressure on a new station to carry the games for a team that'll probably look the same next year, depending on what pieces you may or may not move.
And when you talk about these two teams, I mean, the play is subpar in many respects. So you do have to look at the general managers, which are realistically the two newer components. So Rick Hahn takes over, for Kenny Williams. So I think this is the first season that the team really has his stamp on it, where you're seeing the changes that he wanted to make, the team he's going to put on the field. And equally, I do believe that the White Sox have to have their fair share of benchmarks for him. Now, I like Rick Hahn a lot. I do. And the Abreu thing is brilliant, let me just say. So if nothing else, right now he looks good. But here's the thing. What facelift can the White Sox give themselves that makes them a contender and what is becoming kind of a top-heavy division with potentially 2 to 3 other teams? So now your question would be for Hahn is, what can Hahn do differently that's going to make this team be able to really contend in the AL Central?
Well, if they can fix that bullpen, obviously we know that when they're going up against Cleveland, when they're going up against Detroit, their starters can keep their offenses at bay. But if the bullpen can hold it down from there, because obviously you're not going to expect Chris Sale to go 9 innings and 130 pitches every 5th day. That's just going to be too much for him. So if they can just get that bullpen, solidified with some better pitching and perhaps maybe getting some more veteran players, more well-known veteran players, I should say, because they have veterans in there now. But if they can fix that, that'll definitely go a long way towards helping the future of the team.
We'll see. It seems like they're a little step closer to where they do need to be. This is the Sports Cypher. I am Maya Akai, the Sports Chica. Holding it down with me in studio is Gabe Salgado, who is a sports contributor for Sports Town Chicago. We're going to take a break. When we come back, Sydney Brown, who is an NHL and Blackhawks writer for We Are Regal Radio. We'll talk Blackhawks off-season move. Stay tuned.
More Sports Cypher in 2 minutes on WVON. Back to the best sports show on the radio, the Sports Cypher.
Welcome back to the Sports Cypher. I'm Maya Akai, the Sports Chico. Just wrapped up talking some Cubs Sox. About to head into the All-Star break, so they get a little break, and we'll see what they come back as, when they get that time off. Co-hosting with me today is Gabe Salgado, who is a contributor for Sports Town Chicago. so he'll be here the whole time, and we talk some World Cup for all my people who had been, nagging me about it, like, you don't talk soccer. I finally gave you it, and it was good.
You got to give them what they want.
Exactly, and I had skirted the issue for a while, so finally we did that, and then obviously we did some Cub talk. So we're going to continue on talking about a Chicago team, the one team that seems to keep us happy most of the time, the Chicago Blackhawks. And to talk about their off-season moves, I have Sydney Brown, who is the NHL contributor for We Are Regal Radio. How you doing tonight, Sydney?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Well, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, how are you guys doing tonight?
We're doing good. We're doing good. All right, so obviously a great season last year. It was a little disappointing only because just missed making it to the Stanley Cup Finals. So after seeing how well LA played, who to me was quite surprising because they struggled at the beginning of the series against the San Jose Sharks, but found their legs by the time, they got to play the Blackhawks. So what changes have they made anticipating that obviously it's going to be a very rigorous season come next year?
You mean what moves have the Blackhawks made?
Yes.
Or the Kings? Well, the moves, not so much that the Blackhawks have made in terms of trades, but re-signing the old guys like Ben Smith, who came up very big last year towards the end of the regular season in the playoffs. They re-signed him. They also re-signed Philip Regan, their fourth-line center, to a one-year deal, and they get back the backup goalie Anthony Renta just to keep that backup core together to help out with their superstars along the line.
And we all know, obviously, that they did the contract extension with Taves and Kane. 8 years, is that correct?
8 years, $84 million each, and with $10.5 million per year, which makes both of them the highest paid players in the National Hockey League.
I was just going to ask you, doesn't that put them on the upper echelon? And this is a big deal for the Blackhawks because, for years they were known for being a team that did not play their players at all. So this is huge. Now, how does it affect what else they're able to do in regards to keeping players?
Well, you have to start by going back to 8 years ago when the old man Dollar Bill Wirtz died and the son Rocky Wirtz took over, and he brought over John McDonough. He brought over the president of business operations, Jay Blanc, and he brought over Stan Bowman eventually a couple of years later. They changed the culture, and they had to change the way that the organization had to carry itself. And they had to start basically from scratch, drafting young players and drafting the cornerstone of the franchise with Kane and Taves, and they had to really compete in free agency, and it got started in the summer of 2008 when they signed defenseman Brian Campbell, and then other moves started coming on down the pipeline, and Mary Hossa a year after that, and to build that championship team. And that's what made the Blackhawks what they are right now. They had to compete in free agency along with drafting good young players, and that's what we saw in 2010, and then again in 2013 with 2 Stanley Cups in 4 years.
Sydney, now the Blackhawks are currently over the salary cap. They got to get to under $69 million by the time the season starts. Patrick Sharp's name has come up in trade talks to release his contract, and recently Johnny O'Dunia's name has also come up in rumors as well. They both make sizable amounts of money, and trading either one of them could help them get some salary cap relief. Which player do you think they'll move if they'll move either one of them?
Me personally, I think they'll move Johnny Oduya only because he's a free agent after next year. He makes $3.3 million. And like you said, they are $2.2 million over the salary cap. If they trade Johnny Oduya, they'll be off the salary cap hook, and they'll give Stan Bowman, the general manager, some wiggle room and to make a move or two down the line, just in case someone gets hurt or someone is ineffective. Stan Bowman has that wiggle room to make a trade or bring somebody up.
What do you think of the Brad Richards acquisition?
I thought that was the best option they could have done, picking up a second-line center. You look at the career of Brad Richards. He started off as a young, hot stud player with the Tampa Bay Tampa Bay Lightning. He won the Conn Smythe Trophy in 2004 when the Tampa Bay Lightning won the Stanley Cup over the Calgary Flames. He went to a young Dallas team and try to help them move along, but things didn't quite work out there. And then he signed a big contract with the New York Rangers a couple of years ago. Didn't have a good 2013, but picked it up a little bit this past season. He had 5 goals and 2 assists for 7 points during the playoffs this year, even though he was slowed down a bit by a little bit for injury. But he's an older player now. He's looking forward to solidifying that second-line center spot. And you need experience with that second line with the Hawks. That's been their problem for years, and I think Brad Richards will help that. especially with the Hawks failing in the trade for not getting Ryan Kessler, who eventually was traded from Vancouver to Anaheim.
So how's the roster looking a bit different? I know I saw that they released Michael Hanzu, correct?
Yes.
Anybody else off the roster that was there during last season?
Well, Nikolai Harvey-Blumen, but you knew that move was coming.
Right,
so,
right.
And plus, Antti Ranta played well when Corey Crawford was out earlier in the season, which solidified Antti Ranta's backup spot, and that's why he was brought back for next year.
Where do you think Teuvo Teravainen fits in the next year's team?
He has a really good shot right now. This kid has speed, as Hawks fans know. He has skill, offensive skill, along with the speed, and he showed that during training camp last year. I know he was brought up later last season because of the injury to Kane and Taves. This kid is only 19 years old. He has the world ahead of him, and he's going to get every opportunity come training camp. I think his progress will be delayed a little bit now because of the free agent signing of Brad Richards. But if anything should happen to Richards or any inconsistencies along those bottom two lines, you might see him up here sooner rather than later. But the Hawks will give him every opportunity this coming training camp to see if he can make the team.
Talking to Blackhawks with Sydney Brown, who is the Blackhawk NHL writer for IHeartRadio Radio. So, Sydney, question. So, during the playoffs, we saw that matchup where they put Kane, Saad, and Shaw together, and it seemed like it was a boost. They were dynamic. Do you think we're going to see a bit more of that coming into this season?
Why not? It worked for him during the King series, as you mentioned this past season. Brandon Saad, who I thought had the best playoffs of his career, especially during the last half of the King series, he's one of those young players that Hawks need to keep around because he's like a young Patrick Kane, but just a little bit less goal score oriented than Kane is. And you take a look at a guy like Andrew Shaw, who's small in size, but he can agitate the opposing team, agitate the opposing goalie, sort of like Big Bufflin did while he was here. But obviously Bufflin's a much bigger guy, so Shaw can annoy the other team and try to get those dirty goals because right now the Hawks don't have too many of those players.
I'm not going to lie, I miss Dustin Bufflin.
I do too. He was a bruiser. It was a good stuff when they had Dustin Bufflin out there. Are they going to hold on to Chris Versteeg?
As of right now, they're going to hold on to Versteeg. Me personally, if it was up to me, I would have gotten rid of him. I was in favor of trading him back to the Chicago Blackhawks this past season, but he's been inconsistent, and during the playoffs, he showed his inconsistency again. He was scratched for a couple of playoff games, but I know Coach Q gave him the last chance in the last couple of games of the LA Kings series, and he really didn't do anything. But I think if he stays on the roster, this will be his last leg.
Sydney, do you expect Jeremy Morin to stick around, or do you think the Blackhawks will move him like they did Brandon Peary?
I think Jeremy Morin, who just got picked up last week, he'll stick around. They really like this kid a lot. He really came up big towards the end of the regular season when Kane and Taves were out with injuries. It was him, Ben Smith, and a couple of other guys who solidified those third and fourth lines. Morin's one of those guys, just like Ben Smith. You could juggle around between the fourth line and the third line, even the second line if you're playing well. Coach Q likes to mix and match, and just because you're on the third and fourth line doesn't mean you're going to stay there. If you do what you're supposed to do, Coach Q and move you around. So that's the kind of players that the Hawks have. You can move around. They don't just have to stay on one or two lines.
Is there anybody that right now they're looking at that you think they're going to sign when this is all said and done? Anybody they're really seriously like they have their sights set on?
One more time, I couldn't hear the first part of that question.
Is there any player out there that they feel like they really need to sign that's going to give them the boost that they would need next year? Not that they need much. It's just obviously LA was a good team, but is there any player that they have had their eye on that they're really looking to put on the roster?
Not to my knowledge, but the roster is pretty much set. They just had to cut down a player or two just to get under the salary cap. From the list of this will probably be their last run as a group because of the salary cap. But people don't know it's going up next year. How much we don't know because of the new TV deal from Canada from Rogers Sportsnet. So the Blackhawks are preparing for the worst should that happen. But I think the roster that you see right now, unless Stan Bowman has something up his sleeve big time, I think this pretty much the roster that you see right now is pretty much going to start opening night in October for the 2014-15 season.
Now, Sydney, the Blackhawks got their prospect camp underway today. Any particular player that you're looking at that could help out either now or perhaps in the future?
Besides Tebow Terravina, you have to look at Mark McNeil, who was a 2011 first-round pick. He could play a wing position. He was a good player from the Rockford IceHawks. And then you have to look at Nick Schmaltz, who was drafted in the first round in this year's draft. He's 5'11", weighs 172 pounds, and he played his hockey up in Green Bay for the United States Hockey League. He might start college in the fall, so you keep your eyes on those young players down the road, because in this salary cap era, you can't keep everybody. And for the Hawks to continue that Stanley Cup contender pace, they need to not just rest up, but it's the word I'm looking for. They just need to continue developing those young players to bring them up along the pipeline.
All right, Sydney, tell everybody how they can find you.
They can find me on Twitter at www.twitter.com/SidKid80. That's SIDKID80. And if you let me have a minute, I would like to thank Damon Sproul, Ken Davis, and our editor-in-chief, Mr. Cal Maines, for helping me throughout this process and working with a great group of guys along with the rest of the staff at We Are Regal Radio. And I also produce a show on ChicagolandSportsRadio.com every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central Time. And that's the Dean Davis Show with Damon Sproul and Ken Davis.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you, Sydney, for stopping in the show. That is Sydney Brown.
Thank you, guys. Have a great night.
Bye-bye. That's Sydney Brown, who is the NHL Blackhawks writer for We Are Regal Radio. You can check him out at RegalRadio.com and check out his work. They cover everything from hockey to baseball, do a lot of different stuff. Good group of guys, for sure. As you should know, Damon Sproul was actually used to be on our show for a bit, so that should be a familiar name that you heard Sydney speak. You know, what was interesting, Gabe, about this, I watched a good portion of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I really did. I mean, it was some good hockey, especially with the realigning and some of the matchups you weren't quite sure what you were going to get. Even though, obviously you weren't always going to get that Chicago-Detroit matchup that you would come to love. Let's be honest, coming out the gates, that matchup against the Blues kind of had you kind of like, whoa, surprising. But obviously they turned that around. The Kings, it's going to be a big contender for them. And it's that youth movement. That was the thing that was so lethal. They were efficient on both sides of the puck, offensively and defensively. And
that series of the Kings, highlighted the void that the Blackhawks had as far as not having a second line center. Yeah. So hopefully Brad Richards can help fix that. And just the Kings, they just really ran the Blackhawks up and down the ice. I mean, it was really hard to watch. And you take a look at the Blackhawks forcing that series of 7 games was just a miracle in itself. Yeah. And another thing that they also need, too, is just like we said, we missed Dustin Byfuglien. We missed that defender that's going to, any forward that thinks they're going to camp out in front of the net, they're going to get knocked down, and they're going to get knocked down hard if Dustin Byfuglien's there. They need a big physical defender like that again, for sure.
That is huge. I think they also got reminded that in the St. Louis Blues series, because part of what St. Louis was trying to do was take them off their square and just be really physical. And that's why they lost those initial couple games, because of how physical. The Blackhawks are not a physical team.
No.
They're really not. So that was kind of, to me, one of the things that St. Louis was doing. When the Blackhawks finally got back to playing the kind of hockey that they play, that's when they started winning.
Definitely.
But with the Kings, obviously they have a good balance of being physical with you. The way that they clog the passing lanes and how they camp out in front of the net is just absolutely amazing how they are. So I think if nothing else, the Blackhawks had to take a lot from that series, because to me, that's probably your next big rival.
Definitely.
It's like you knocked them off last year, and you got the Stanley Cup, and they did the same to you this year.
Vancouver's kind of fallen off the rails, so to speak. They're in the process of rebuilding to some degree, so definitely see the Kings being a challenge. The St. Louis Blues, we can't count out Colorado either. They're starting to come up as well. And back to the point that Sydney made about Bill Wirtz. I don't wish death upon anybody. That's a very sad thing. But it wasn't until that he passed away that the team finally started getting better. And as much as it hurts me to say that, at the same time, it's been great for the fan base. That now they're dishing out the money to bring in the type of talent they need. Now, granted, I also believe that the salary caps kind of hurt the game of hockey, because for so long there wasn't one. Yeah. And I think that if there was no salary cap in place, the 2010 team could have repeated a couple times as champions.
Yeah, because people don't realize when they won in 2010, they kind of got rid of quite a few key players.
Almost everybody.
But that just goes to show you that how good the depth was. and how good they are with developing young talent. I mean, just you take that for granted until your team all of a sudden can't compete, because we know the championships are great, but they tend to break up dynasties easily.
And just to give an idea of how some people, fans dismiss things such as the salary cap, and we were all riding the high wave when they won that championship, but then when the announcement came, we got to release this guy, trade that guy, a lot of the fans were ready to hit the panic button, but for those of us, you and I, who work in the media, we knew that it was coming because everybody was making so much money, and the cap was at a certain number that just couldn't afford to keep everybody.
They couldn't, and that's, unfortunately, that's what's great about when your team wins. That does come with a cost. It really does. But so far, the last couple of years, they've done a good job with having a core that they could hold together. This is the Sports Cypher. Maya Akai, along with Gabe Salgado, holding it down with me. That wraps up our NHL talk. When we come back from this NBC News break, we're going to talk some NBA free agency and Bulls with Brian Crawford. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The talk of Chicago is 1690 WVON, Berwyn, Chicago.
In this song.
The announcement set off wild celebrations in a city that has not won a pro championship in any sport for 50 years. My relationship with Northeast Ohio is bigger than basketball, James said in a statement published by Sports Illustrated. I didn't realize that 4 years ago. I do now. James, a native of Akron, Ohio, was a phenomenal playmaker from a very young age who went straight from high school to the Cavaliers. But 4 years ago, James announced his departure for Miami in what amounted to a nationally televised jilting of Cleveland. Humiliated fans burned his jersey, and his image was torn from the arena. Cavs owner Dan Gilbert castigated him for a cowardly betrayal. Today, Gilbert tweeted, "Welcome home," and reportedly offered the four-time league MVP a 4-year deal worth $88 million.
Once again, it's on.
1690 WVON.
Welcome back to the Sports Cypher. I am Maya Akai, the Sports Chica, along with Gabe Salgado. We got that first hour under our belt. We covered quite a bit. World Cup. We talked some Chicago absent baseball. And then some NHL, talk Blackhawks with Sidney Brown from IHeartRadio. He is their NHL contributor. And now we're going to shift gears and talk about what everybody has been talking about all week, which is NBA free agency. And, of course, we will talk Chicago Bulls as well in that conversation. And to help us facilitate that conversation, we have Brian Crawford, who is a NBA contributor for NBC, Red Eye, Comcast Sportsnet, Slam, covers quite a bit. How you doing tonight, Brian?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good. So were you as captivated by free agency as it seems like everybody else was?
I don't know if it was captivated is the right word. I was probably more annoyed than anything because I just kind of felt like it just drug out for just so long. It was like, the key guys that everybody was waiting for. Obviously LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh. It was like nobody had made a decision. So, once the first domino fell, which is obviously, LeBron, I kind of felt better then because I knew, things would progress, and they did. But like those first, 10, 11 days, it was a little annoying because, you had a lot of stories about who's going to go where and who's going to do what. And, nobody really knew anything. So captivated. I mean, I know some people were. For me, it was just like, wow, I just wish these guys would make a decision already, like no matter what it is.
So, it's kind of interesting that initially when free agency began that Carmelo Anthony was the biggest topic of conversation. Then obviously when LeBron James jumped into the pool, that's all the attention really, a lot of it at least, I think shifted towards what he was going to do. Here was my thought, Brian, and tell me if you agree with this. Initially when LeBron got involved and D-Wade and everybody else kind of went with Miami Heat, I thought initially this might be their way of trying to, restructure contracts to be able to free up some money to bring in other players. But I thought it was very interesting when LeBron's agent went to Cleveland to start the conversation with Dan Gilbert and co. about LeBron potentially coming back. And my thought was this: LeBron is probably going to leave Miami because I doubt he would open that can of worms, put Cleveland out there like that, and then not go. What was your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it was one of those things. Like, when he first went to Miami, a lot of people felt like there was a possibility that he could go back in 4 years, and I didn't really think that was realistic at the time. But after hearing Cleveland, being mentioned so many times and so often, it was hard to dismiss it almost. It was just one of those things where, obviously they've been to four straight championships. Each single year, their roster just seemed to get, worse and worse. Dwayne Wade's health got worse and worse, and, LeBron was carrying, so much more of the load. And, I just felt like, at the end of that run, there wasn't really a whole lot that they can do. I mean, especially if LeBron wants max money, which he deserves to get, then that doesn't free up a lot of money to make a strong team, especially and not keep those three guys together. So I think, with him going back to Cleveland, I personally felt like he never should have left the first time, because I thought, the Cavs were really and truly like they were right there. And so I kind of understand why, the owner was upset. I don't, condone what he said, but I mean, I understand why he was upset. I understand why why the people of Cleveland were upset. And I know they're glad to have him back. I don't think they make them. I don't think LeBron makes them a championship contender right off the bat, because their team is still very young, and he, aside from Varejao, he's probably he's the only other veteran really and truly on the team, and they have a new coach, so they have a lot of things working against them. They got a lot of things working for them. Obviously, LeBron, Kyrie Irving, Andrew Wiggins. So I think it's a great story. But I mean, I didn't have a problem with him going back. I actually thought it was, going to Miami, even though he won 4 championships, I just thought it was, that run was over. That's just what it was. Those guys came together. They won a couple championships, and that was the end of that chapter. And so now he's on to the next one.
So let's look at, what's left out there. Of course, there was always that rumor that, Dwayne Wade, would be considering coming to Chicago. And here's what I said. Why in God's name would anybody want Dwayne Wade, given that he is in the twilight of his career? There is nothing he can do for Chicago. And to me, that would be wasting money that needs to be spent elsewhere.
Well, I mean, he's definitely not going to come to Chicago now. Obviously with the Bulls signing Pau Gasol and then, bringing over Mirotic, he's going to come. And, I think they just re-signed Kirk Heinrich. So there's not a lot of money left for Dwayne Wade. And I think he's going to be a Miami Heat player for life. Once he retires, he's probably going to get a job in the front office and kind of ways. He's going to be tied to that that franchise forever. So, him coming to Chicago, I think that was probably more or less, this conversation that was going on Twitter. He's definitely not going to leave the Heat. It's going to be him, Chris Bosh, and they just signed Luol Deng today. So, he's not going anywhere. But to say that, I think the Bulls probably could have used a talent like him. Even if he is, like you said, at the twilight of his career, I think they still need somebody that can create on the perimeter. I still think they need someone to be able to get their own shot, and Dwayne Wade would have been able to do that, even if you brought him off the bench. But, now that's not a realistic option. The Bulls still have some more shuffling to make, I think. Obviously they're very strong on the front line now, but they really need to get their backcourt and their wings solidified. So, they still got a lot of work ahead of them this summer.
So let's talk about kind of the moves that the Bulls have made, because here's one thing I guess Chicago fans can take a deep breath on. You actually were not shunned in this particular free agency. You did end up with Pau Gasol, which is not a bad thing to get. So Carmelo goes back to New York. You didn't lose out on that, because that probably would have been egg on the face had he went anywhere else. And LeBron was never even entertaining coming to Chicago. So this is the one free agency that Bulls fans should say, okay, I feel okay with this. Now, when you talk about that backcourt, you're right. There's some things they're going to have to work on. What I do like, what I see right now is, obviously Pau Gasol coming in, he's going to be a power forward, obviously, because the whole center thing is locked up with Noah, unless they're going to be rotating the two of them. Now, when you talk about that perimeter outside shot, Nikola Mirotic is known to be a good perimeter shooter. Now, is it Real Madrid? Isn't that who he plays for? Real Madrid.
Yeah.
Real Madrid. Part of what they say makes him so dynamic is that he is a scorer, that he can create his own shot. So, barring that he's NBA ready, and I'm assuming he's NBA ready. I've seen some highlights of him play a bit here and there. It seems like he might be the answer for what they're looking for. And then he's physically a big guy, too, so they're going to have some good post presence, depending on how they decide to use him.
Well, I think, obviously he's NBA ready because he's been a professional basketball player for, quite some time. Now, it's still going to take him some time to get acclimated to the game because, the NBA basketball is very different from, the basketball that they play in the EuroLeague. So, he's going to have to, make that adjustment and, take his bumps and bruises and feel his way out from there. But, at 6'10", he can definitely shoot the ball. And then, you have Doug McDermott on the other side, even though he's a rookie. I think he dropped like 31 today in the Summer League game. So, he's going to help them shooting too. So, I like how they position themselves in terms of shooters, but I still think they need a scorer. And I think there's a very distinct difference between the two. Carmelo Anthony is a scorer. Like, he's a guy that can put the ball in the basket, whenever it's needed. Derrick Rose, when healthy, is a scorer. But I feel like, even with the things that they've done, I still think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Derrick Rose that I really don't like to see. Like, I would like to see, less of it. But, like I said, you can't really do anything about, not missing out on Carmelo. Who's going to get mad at a guy for not leaving $50 million on the table? Nobody can really blame him for that. It's definitely disappointing, but, who wouldn't understand, a guy getting $74 million in Chicago versus $125 million in New York. Anybody should be able to, grasp that concept. So, I think, I like what they've done in terms of skill guys. They have a lot of skill guys, and you can never have enough of those. But I just really and truly think they still need somebody who can just, go off for 30 or 40, whenever. And obviously that guy isn't out there, so they pretty much have to make the best of what they have. But the past couple seasons, even without Derrick Rose, we've seen, their defense is going to carry them. So, this may not be as bad. And I think, it helps a lot, too, because the East is really kind of wide open now and is actually, pretty balanced.
Absolutely,
LeBron leaving Miami, that kind of opens up a lot. He's going to Cleveland and, New York. They're still not a threat, even if they keep Carmelo. So, there's still a chance that the Bulls can make some noise in the East. I would have liked to see them do something, more on the perimeter. Like I said, that could happen. But, so far from what they have now, I think they have a pretty good team.
Talking with Brian Crawford, who is an NBA contributor for the Red Eye, CSN, Slam Magazine. So what about there's always, the rumor mill is always moving when you talk about, free agency. What about Lance Stevenson? Do you think he could be a fit in Chicago? Would it be worth it? Is it worth entertaining?
Oh, no.
I knew you were going to say that.
No. And I think, and it's not because Lance doesn't have talent. Obviously, he has talent. But, the Bulls are really big on character guys, and Lance is Lance. He's going to be a distraction.
Character. Is that what you're saying, Brian?
Yeah, his character at times is a little questionable.
Well, yeah, and this wasn't the Pacers. They had some rough goings towards the season last year. Just wasn't good for them. So here's my questions. We've looked at some of the deficiencies. That scoring has always been an issue. It's still the huge elephant in the room that has not been solved. How can they truly remedy this? Can they find someone in free agency? We know that Pau Gasol's a good player. He's 34. Sometimes, and I do like Pau Gasol, but he can be a little soft, a little bit sometimes. With the Lakers, when he was with the Lakers, he had his moments. He really did, but he's still a good player. But my question, when you look at what's out there, what can they really get that's going to give them that scoring boost? Because everyone believed that Carmelo Anthony was that scoring boost. So what do you look at in free agency? Who can they sign that's going to make a difference?
In free agency, there's not a whole lot of guards left. The only other person out there right now that I can think of off the top of my head is probably Detroit's Rodney Stuckey. I think he's still one of those guys that's still kind of in limbo. I don't know if he's restricted or unrestricted, but he's a guy that could potentially remedy that. But I think now this free agent class really and truly it wasn't that great. It was LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Bosh Wade. and Luol Deng, and then a host of other guys that are really kind of fringe players, like no dynamic scorers out there. So, I mean, in this situation, they're really and truly just going to have to make do with what they have. I mean, they're going to have to get really creative. I'm sorry, go ahead.
What about Kevin Love? Was he really worth courting? I mean, do you think he could have given that scoring boost that they needed?
I wasn't really that high on Kevin Love, just because obviously, I know he's putting up crazy numbers in Minnesota, but he's like the best player on a bad team. And, I'm not really that. I like him. I don't necessarily think he's the answer. And I think, the acquisition of Powell and Rodgers, I think he's pretty much out of the picture at this point. So, I mean, there's really, like I said, there's really truly not a whole lot they can do in terms of finding a legit scorer. Paul Pierce, even though he's well into his 30s now, I think he just re-signed with the Wizards. Trevor Ariza is going to Houston.
Trevor
guys
Ariza, that's a player that if they could have somehow gotten their hands on Trevor Ariza, I would have been very pleased with that acquisition. I watched Trevor when he was with the Lakers. I was like, he is a really solid talent, and you really got to. He was a huge difference maker for Washington this year. I don't know if people realized it, but he was a huge difference maker. So Trevor Ariza would have been a nice free agent to land.
Oh,
for
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, he would have been a good acquisition. But I mean, like I said, you can't. The Bulls, it was just like 4 years ago. It was, they swung for the fences, and you have to commend them for that. And they didn't hit a home run. They hit a deep fly ball out to the warning track. I mean, that thing, that happens sometimes. That's just in the game. So like I said, I definitely appreciate the effort of trying to, address their most pressing needs, and they just haven't been able to do it. But at the end of the day, their plan Bs have always worked out. Even though 4 years ago they didn't get any of the big fish, they still put together a solid team and went to the Eastern Conference Finals. And I still think they could potentially do that again this year. I thought the Gasol acquisition was more or less like a lateral move, obviously because, if you whiff on Carmelo Anthony and you get Pau Gasol, he's a little bit better than Carlos Boozer. But, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. I don't think he's that piece that puts you over the top. But, the Bulls have been very good at, assembling complementary players that kind of work well together.
Hold that thought for me. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll continue our NBA talk.
Okay.
This is the Sports Cypher, Maya Akai, Gabe Soldado. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Back to the best sports show on the radio, the Sports Cypher.
Welcome back to the Sports Cypher. I'm Maya Akai, the Sports Chica. We are dead in the midst of talking NBA free agency and Bulls. We have Brian Crawford, who is an NBA contributor for the Red Eye, CSN, Slam Magazine. Also co-piloting the show with me tonight, I've got Gabe Salgado, so make sure you are tuned in and listening. So, Brian, let's we talked Bulls.
Yep.
It seems like there's some things here they're going to have to work on, but there were some other interesting things that happened in free agency, too.
Yeah, Brian, my question to you is, the Houston Rockets, they missed out on Carmelo, obviously. They missed out on Chris Bosh. They traded Jeremy Lin. They're hoping to land Chandler Parsons, but they did get Trevor Ariza. Do you think, two-part question actually, do you think Trevor Ariza salvages their free agency journey, and do you think they'll make any more moves afterwards?
Well, they actually just lost Chandler Parsons. They decided not to match the offer sheet that he signed to the Dallas Mavericks. So Chandler Parsons is going to be in Dallas next year. So, I mean, Trevor Ariza is probably – I don't think he's a bad player. I actually think he's very good. And, I think him and Chandler Parsons may be a wash. I think Ariza is better defensively and Parsons is better offensively. But, I think, defense is a lot of what they need, especially out on the perimeter. I mean, James Harden isn't that great of a defender. And, Trevor Ariza can guard 1, 2, and 3 positions. So I think they're very good there. As far as any other moves that they'll make, I'm not really sure. I think the Ariza thing, I think they messed up pretty badly when they let Chandler Parsons become a free agent early, and Dallas swooped in and they gave him that max deal, and that's a lot of money. I mean, the salary cap is still a real thing in the NBA. And so, they were able to not necessarily lose on the wing by getting Trevor Ariza, simply because he's still a very good player, and he could fill in admirably for Chandler Parsons, I think, and at a much cheaper rate. So, I mean, I think I think for what they did and what they were able to do, I think they did pretty good, losing Chandler Parsons and except Trevor Ariza isn't a bad consolation prize at all.
Now, DJ Augustine signed with the Detroit Pistons, played with the Bulls last year, did a pretty good job for the Bulls. Do you think he makes any difference for Detroit considering how bad they've been the last few years?
I mean, I don't know, man. That team has a lot of things wrong with it. I think DJ Augustine is definitely a solid point guard. I would have rather the Bulls had kept him instead of Kirk Hinrich for the same money, but it is what it is. They love Kirk Hinrich and they kept him around. I mean, I'm hoping DJ Augustine can go up there and do well like he did in Chicago, and put a lot of pressure on Brandon Jennings. I think that's a guy that we've been watching for a few years now and has only shot above 40% one season. And I think, with a guy like, DJ Augustine, who had his best season of his career, in Chicago, I think that guy could, put a lot of pressure on him to either, get better or, force Detroit to make a move and go in a different direction. But I like the Augustine pickup. It does make me wonder what they're going to do with Will Bynum because, that would just be another little guard that they got up there. But, I mean, I think DJ resurrected his career in Chicago, and, we see that he can play. So I think that was a good move for him.
What is the whole thing with, before the exit of Luol Deng, the Bulls offered him, 3 years, $30 million. He turned it down. Goes to Cleveland. Mm-hmm. But the Heat offers him 2 years, $20 million, and he takes it, and clearly takes it from a team that's not going to look the same when he gets there. I just don't get it, Brian. Why would he, was he just ready to exit Chicago? Is that ultimately what it was?
I had a conversation about this yesterday, and I think it all goes back to if you look at Luol Deng's career here, I don't think he was ever really fully appreciated. I think for 6 or 7 years in a row, at the trade deadline, people wanted him to get moved. And, when he broke his leg, I think it was his first or second year, people were calling him soft. He got a bad rap for no reason. And then Tom Thibodeau came in. He became an all-star 2 times, one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. But I think what really soured the relationship between him and the Bulls that would allow him to take the same money from Miami that he turned down from Chicago was the thing, a couple of years ago when he had a spinal tap in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And, instead of the team, on the surface it looked like they didn't have his back. Instead of just saying, with the guy, he was really sick, we sent him to the hospital, he had a spinal tap, people saying, the report that came out of the front office was he basically couldn't play because of flu-like symptoms. So once again, you make your guy look bad, when there's something really serious going on. And, fans, they don't know. So they think, oh, wow, Lou is soft. He's sitting out because he's sick. But no, he had a spinal tap, which is a very serious procedure. And then, he had some type of spinal fluid leaking and things like that. And he had to go back into the hospital. And it was just, I think that move right there is what really kind of soured him on the front office. And, he felt like that's why they traded him, and he definitely wasn't going to take that money. I think at one point he thought he was going to get more. I thought he was going to get more too. But, I just think it was just a really bad breakup, and that's why he chose to go to Miami for the same money that he turned down from Chicago.
Now, Brian, Kenyon Martin did an interview with CBS Sports recently, and even though he didn't play a full season last year, he says he wants to re-sign with the Knicks. He wants to play with Carmelo Anthony, and he believes that the two of them together can help turn the team around. Do you believe a word that he says when he says that?
I mean, I believe it if he believes it. But I think, the reality of the situation is the Knicks aren't going anywhere, man. It doesn't matter what they do. I mean, they're gambling a lot. They're definitely not going to do anything next year. And then, basically they're gambling in free agency over the next 2 seasons. I mean, Phil is gambling over the allure of being Phil Jackson, having 11 rings, and, they're gambling on the allure of playing in New York and Madison Square Garden. But, I mean, nobody is really flocking to New York as a free agent to go play there, just like they're not flocking to Chicago to come play here. So, I mean, they are really rolling the dice, but I think at this point they don't really have a choice. I mean, they have to do something. They were able to keep Melo, so that's a good start. But I truly don't think that, within the next 5 years of Carmelo Anthony being in New York that they're going to win a championship. So, like I said, if Kenyon Martin believes that he can help turn them around, that's cool. But I mean, I watch a lot of basketball, man, and I don't think Kenyon Martin is the answer.
You're just not seeing it, huh? You're just not seeing it. I'm with you on that.
Speaking of Phil Jackson, and I'm surprised not so many people have brought this up yet. You know, he managed to convince Carmelo Anthony to stay. So now, how much pressure does that put on Phil to turn this team around and get them back to the promised land?
I mean, what's the promised land? They haven't won a championship since like 1973.
Exactly.
So I mean, I think in that situation, it's really baby steps. I mean, I've heard they're going to try to go hard after Kevin Durant, and everybody will be, and I think in a year or two. So I mean, I feel like they think, like I said, what I think they feel that they have as leverage is just like the history of the franchise and history of Phil Jackson. But I mean, these are, as we've seen like the last couple of years, especially in free agency, these players that are in the league today are motivated by a lot of different things, and I don't think winning is always that high on the list for a lot of these guys, and it's really hard to kind of tell what they really care about. So I mean, I don't know if these guys are really, tuned into the history of New York and Madison Square Garden. I don't know if that really matters to them. So I think that's, I think that's what Carmelo and Phil and the rest of those guys in the, in the New York Knicks front office are gambling on. And it's, it's going to be rough, man. I mean, we'll see in the next couple of years. But, like I said, after I've seen the past 3 or 4 free agencies, I don't pretend to know what these guys care about anymore.
Brian, I agree with you on that. It's kind of hard to tell because I really thought that Carmelo was truly thinking about where he could go to win a ring. And apparently, if you're going back to New York, money was the thing that was driving his decision. So I guess we'll see. But I'm with you. I'm not seeing much changing in the next 2 seasons for them. But hey, we got enough issues here in Chicago to worry about when we talk about trying to get back to the promised land. Well, Brian, thank you for coming on the show. Tell my listeners how they can find you.
You guys can find me on Twitter at Brian, BRYANCRAW, 4 and D. You can also check me in the Red Eye, NBC Chicago, CSN Chicago. I'm all over the place, but I'm mostly on Twitter, so you can really find me there.
Speaking Trapanese, as you said? That's funny when I was reading your Twitter page. I'm like, okay, Brian. All right, Brian, thank you for checking into the show. Appreciate it.
All right, no problem.
That was Brian Crawford, who's an NBA contributor for the Red Eye, Comcast Sportsnet Chicago, Slam Magazine, does a little bit of everything. He lives and breathes basketball, so definitely check him out on Twitter for sure. This free agency, and I'm kind of like Brian on this, Gabe, and tell me what your thoughts was. I got to the point where I felt like, why does this just feel like I'm being dragged through the mud, having to wait and be captivated by what LeBron or somebody else is going to do?
And just to put in perspective on how this pretty much drove everybody crazy. My 16-year-old nephew, for days, just waited for Carmelo to make his decision. Come on, Melo. And then finally LeBron came out first, and then Melo afterwards. And I can understand the frustration that everybody felt because it seemed like the league, just froze in time, until Carmelo and LeBron made their choices. And I really think it shouldn't be like that because obviously the Phoenix Suns weren't going to get LeBron James.
No.
The Bulls weren't going to get LeBron James.
No.
The Lakers. Maybe, but
only because it's the Lakers.
Yeah, definitely. And I just think that it's insane how everybody just put their plans on hold, waiting for these two guys to make a decision, especially teams that weren't even.
Something as a fan, it was driving me crazy.
Really?
You know, I'm a big gamer, right? So I got 2K at home, so I put Melo in the game, and I said, oh man, this really changes the team because boy was shooting way on the perimeter, and then the final word came down. What a bummer.
But, him staying in New York was huge for Phil Jackson. Let's just say this. Had Carmelo Anthony decided to walk and sign with another team, with that being your first year as a general manager of the team and you lose your biggest marquee star, the person who possibly can help you win or get to a championship, when you lose that player, that's a huge mark against, what kind of leverage you have with your players.
And you take a look at the position that Phil Jackson is in. The last decade, being president of the Knicks has not been the most glamorous job in the world. It's been a revolving door, and especially since the Knicks' top brass does not always give their basketball operations the autonomy they need to operate. So getting him to stay in New York was huge for him, but now Phil really needs to deliver.
Yeah, And I do believe the Knicks organization obviously has a special relationship with Phil Jackson. That was always one of the conversations that he was going back to New York at some point. I think most thought probably in a coaching capacity.
That's what I thought as well.
I did too, but I think he probably felt like I'm past my prime on that. I cannot keep my zen together trying to coach players. But it would have been interesting, being able to, to coach the likes of Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Carmelo Anthony. That's quite a track record, especially if you could put a ring on each one of those players' fingers.
And when you especially take a look at how Phil, even if he doesn't have star players, like take a look at every championship team he's ever coached. The starters are some of the best players in the league. The bench guys are just guys he just finds out of nowhere but turns them into a cohesive unit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it would have made sense for him to be the coach of the Knicks. But obviously, just like you said, that's not in his sphere anymore. But I think that, obviously the position that he holds, the question is, what is the time frame that, the Knicks front office is giving him?
Exactly. What are they going to give him, obviously. But they have a little patience because, like, for instance, they were patient with the coach, Mike Woodson. And actually, I don't feel that Mike Woodson did an awful job. He might have been too much of a disciplinarian. That might have been the issue with some of those players.
And he was also dealt a tough hand by the people above him.
Yes. I mean, he was given a limited kind of talent. You can't squeeze blood from a turnip. I mean, it is what it is. So they're going to have to figure out what they can surround Carmelo with that's going to make them, a championship caliber team. Now, granted, the East is wide open. I agree with Brian on this. With the, I guess you could say, the dismantling of the Heat, for what it's worth. With the exit of LeBron, that team is no longer, they're just not the creme de la creme. Now, granted, this was a very interesting season because you saw the likes of teams like the Washington Wizards get better, but now they've had some changes. Letting Ariza go was huge for them. I don't care what anybody says. Heck, even not the Bobcats, but the Charlotte Hornets. I mean, finally kind of, cracked and made some progress. I mean, so it'll be a very interesting season. The Pacers had a huge slump. Not quite sure. I think that was a mental slump for them. Because clearly the talent was there. But something was going on in that locker room that wasn't conducive for them being the kind of team that they needed to be.
And it's amazing how those sort of things happen in any sport.
Yes, when people are mentally out of their game, it obviously translates to what happens on the court. So, if you're a Bulls fan, here's what you should say. When you look at the East in general, it is wide open. But the Bulls actually have a good amount of, if you want to call it a core, I guess we have to call it a core when you talk about Derrick Rose, knock on wood, healthy. I'm going to keep harping on the fact that he's going to play for Team USA over the summer is huge for his development and being ready for the game when the season starts and they don't have to use kid gloves with him.
Oh, man, yeah.
I mean, it's going to be key that he's going to, get that kind of, competition in, stretch his legs. It's a big deal for him. So I'm glad he's choosing to do that. And the Bulls are supportive of it. That's good. So when you look at that, you've got a healthy Derrick Rose coming back. You obviously have Joakim Noah really stepped his game up last year. And he's not that player that's going to step backwards. Now, we know historically when you get that tandem of a strong center with a good point guard, that's something good to have. So if that symbiotic relationship can be established, it's good. So if you look at putting Paul Gasol in the mix, Mirotic is coming over. He's a good perimeter shooter. Yes, you don't have a pure scorer besides Derrick Rose, but let's look at a team who did it without maybe having a pure scorer. The Spurs. There was no pure scorer on that.
Everybody on the team averages 15 points a game.
Right. So they had, they had people that obviously could score points, but there were no pure scorers. Very much role-oriented team, excellent coaching. That's the difference maker.
There's a lot of hope as far as scoring goes. I know people are looking, that's why the Bulls got Doug McDermott. As much as I'd like to agree with that sentiment, let's keep in mind, Jimmer Fredette, who spent the second half of last year with the Bulls, he scored 30 points a game in college too. Gets to the NBA, doesn't really play a whole lot. So, that doesn't always translate over. But I will say this about Doug McDermott. Covering DePaul last year, I was at Allstate Arena the night Creighton came to town. The guy doesn't miss a shot. I mean, you could put your hand in his face all day and he'll still make a shot. I mean, he is a very tough player.
That's good to hear. And look at it this way. The Bulls obviously have it in their mindset that he's going to translate in the NBA. And like he said, like Brian said, in the summer league today, he put up, 31 points?
Yeah.
So that's pretty good because you're playing against some good competition. I mean, you're playing pretty much the best of the best in your draft class.
Right.
So it's good to see he's putting up that kind of numbers with that kind of competition. That's good. Because I'm not to be mean at Creighton. He just wasn't quite getting that type of competition. Not to be mean.
True.
But, I mean, they played some good teams, but not the level of competition that makes you feel like I can really assess and see how good. And plus, this is the NBA. True. Everything is 10 steps above what you just left.
I mean, yeah, he's not going to be playing DePaul and Xavier and Villanova every week, you know.
It's not going to happen. But obviously the Bulls felt he was worth it because what they gave up to get to him. Because he went much higher in the draft than I would have ever anticipated. They didn't want to leave him sitting there, though I think he still would have been there. Honestly.
What amazed me even more is the fact that Denver was so willing to part ways with him. Denver took those 2 picks from the Bulls. And, I mean, when you take a look at the type of profile that McDermott had coming into the draft. I mean, just the fact that Denver's like, okay, here, take them. We'll take your draft picks. I mean, it's just like, I had to sit back and absorb that for a minute. Like, wait a minute, did Denver really just do that? So as much as you'd like to give credit to the Bulls, which they, had been talking about that they were probably going to shop those 2 draft picks,
right.
all along,
right.
but the fact that, Denver, which could use a little more offense, was just so willing to just part ways with McDermott, like that's just amazing.
And some of the players that were still, I mean, it was an interesting pick. But here's my thing: the other issue with the Bulls is often, that Coach Tom Thibodeau doesn't like to start rookies. Well, here's my thing: there's no way you made this type of investment in Doug McDermott for him not to be on the floor and get minutes. I mean, he was kind of gracious with Tony Snell this year. I don't think he got nearly as many minutes as he should have, but he got some. So I'm assuming for what they gave up to get to McDermott, we should expect to see him on the floor.
Definitely. Now the only question is, how does this affect Mike Dunleavy?
Well, Dunleavy, he did what he was supposed to do. Probably not as consistently as I would have liked, but like you said, McDermott just doesn't miss is the thing. So when you have a shooter like that, and he's actually a pure shooter. He really is. I mean, you've got to put him on the floor. They let, DJ Augustin go, who I really wish they would have kept because he was a very valuable role player. Nothing wrong. I like Kurt Heinrich, but not enough to let the likes of, Augustin go because of what he really contributed. Gabe Salgado, Maya Akai, Sports Cypher. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Sports Cypher. I am Maya Akai with Gabe Salgado co-hosting with me today. It's been great having you in studio.
Yeah, it's fun.
We were able to get a little World Cup talking there for my people who were clamoring for it. I fulfilled my promise and got you that, so that was good. So we're talking NBA, obviously. The NBA free agency has been absolutely crazy. What's been going on, with obviously Carmelo Anthony and LeBron James being, the 2 top names where everybody wanted to see where they were going to go. I'm not quite sure if it's a surprise either way. I will say this. I really thought that Carmelo Anthony was clearly courting leaving New York because he really, made the rounds. It seemed like he didn't want to stay. I mean, and understand there's not much around him, and Brian hit the nail on the head. It's going to be tough getting people to want to go and play in New York.
I wonder if it was – I don't necessarily think it was the money. I really wonder if it was just his wife saying, no, I want to stay in New York.
Everybody just always defers back to Lala.
I love it. It's so easy to say the money, but I honestly believe that, Carmelo, I mean, if it took him this long to make a decision, he really was considering coming here to Chicago. So I kind of wonder how much, his family played a part in that.
I mean, I get that, but for me, here's the thing. If his passion is to win a ring in his career, it is probably not going to happen while he's in New York. So you have to look at it this way. So I understand Denver was, not the greatest place to be. So they're both from New York. They get closer to home. But if his goal is to win a championship, it's just not going to happen there. So teams were courting him, like Houston was pretty much. That would get you a step closer.
Definitely.
You put Carmelo Anthony on the Houston Rockets, and I think you're looking at a championship coming down that pipeline.
I think that even Chris Bosh with the Houston Rockets would have, I know he's not great, but you have Dwight Howard, you have James Harden right there with him, and makes him look slightly better. Now, maybe not as much as it did with James and Wade, but I'm really surprised that Bosh really took that deal to go back to Miami because Houston was offering more money for the same amount of years.
And I don't know if it has a lot to do with mission accomplished, that, he's got the ring, so maybe, Pat Riley talked to him and felt like, hey, stay here. I don't know, maybe it's a comfortability. Like, you're here, you're invested, you don't kind of have to restart this all over again.
Or maybe he thinks he could be the leader now with LeBron gone.
Well, he didn't do well with that with the Toronto Raptors. So I don't think he's really like the leadership type guy.
But at the same time, the Raptors didn't always put good talent around him.
I agree. But, there's an absence of huge talent being gone. I mean, the exit of LeBron James is huge. Now, what's interesting, and I've asked people this question a couple times, and I'll put it out there to you too, is, obviously with LeBron James going back to Cleveland, the prodigal son returning home kind of thing, do you feel at this point that he has anything to prove or to lose by going back to Cleveland? I mean, is it imperative that now he wins the ring there, or is it just the fact that he's going back, he's back home, he's playing? Is that enough? He
has to win. To make the whole big thing about redemption and returning home, and this is where I want to raise my family and everything else. He has to win. That's really the only way he could solidify his legacy and restore his legacy with the Cleveland fan base is to win a title. I mean, there's no question about that.
Do you think they'll hate him if he doesn't win?
I don't know if they'll hate him, but they'll definitely give him a hard time. That's for sure.
There's going to be that initial honeymoon period just because he's back. Because understand, when he left Cleveland, And I went to Cleveland for a visit a couple years ago. They hated LeBron.
They tried to burn his picture from the side of the arena. I mean, that's
that.
just wow.
When you talk about a city of broken hearts, because he was like Cleveland's son. He grew up in Akron. They watched him play in high school. You know, him coming out of high school, it was a big deal. He, would go to Cleveland, go to games. Everybody in Cleveland knew who LeBron was. He
even sold out high school football games the one year he played tight end in high school, and he became Mr. Football.
So understand, it was the way he left also that made it very difficult for people in Cleveland, and I understand. I get that. So, he did the right thing by courting the possible, maybe I might go back. And he tested the waters to see how receptive people would be. And they were relatively receptive to him saying he would like to come back. So it'll be interesting. What I think is great for him is he's coming back to Cleveland at an interesting time in regards to talent. I mean, you've got Andre Wiggins, you've got Kyrie Irving, you've got Deion Waiters. This is a young, very flashy team. It'll be interesting to see how he works into the mix of all this.
I will say this, right off the bat, he already has more talent than what he had the last time he was in Cleveland.
Yes.
They just got to put it all together. And, now the city is trying to do this whole big marketing thing by combining James with Johnny Manziel. They're trying to get more tourism, I guess.
LeBron, stay away.
Yes, definitely.
Stay away from Johnny Money. Don't do it. But yeah, it's really interesting. So this will be a young, fast team. I think he's actually going to enjoy it. Now, what's interesting, I think this deal is only like a 2-year deal that he did with Cleveland. But here's the thing. He didn't invest a lot of time. I think they were shooting for a 4-year deal initially, but I think he only did 2.
I was reading something about, I think it's in 2016 is when the league's collective bargaining agreement
and that might have a lot to do
that
with
had something to do with it, but they're fully expecting him to probably sign an extension at some point.
Right.
So, but I hope that the Cleveland fans don't read too much into that because it sounds like this time he's in it for the long haul.
Well, I think he has to be because I'm sure the decision he made to go back was this. If you leave under duress again, it will not be good. I'm sure he knew in going back that this came with the cost that exiting won't be as easy. You're going to have a better exit strategy than what you had
Retire.
the first time. Right. Because people are not going to do well with that. So, it'll have to be Cleveland is tired of you. You won't get to be tired of Cleveland. But like you said, the amount of talent around him this time is drastically different. So he does get to go back, and Anderson Varejao is still there. So he's got one person. But, before it was like the likes of Eric Snow and, just the talent level compared to these new kids is entirely different.
And remember when they had Shaquille O'Neal there, he was already at the end of his rope.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just...
I forgot about that.
That was just a desperate reach right there.
I forgot that experiment even happens. So it'll be interesting. I mean, definitely more people will be watching Cleveland. Matter of fact, I won't be surprised if they're one of the featured games when the NBA week kicks off.
Sunday afternoons. Yeah.
Expect to see that as part of the big lineup because you remember Derrick Rose was that game against the Bulls and I can't remember, was it the Heat? Yes, was a big featured NBA game. So I expect to have Cleveland as maybe one of those games in rotation. It will be interesting. But, when you flip back to Chicago, you talk about, to me, they did the best they could possibly do in free agency. You couldn't ask for more than what you have. You looked out and got a decent player. Like I said, you only would have had egg on your face if, let's say, Carmelo Anthony chose to go to Houston or someone else after, Chicago was his first visit when free agency opened up and you could do the official visit. So
definitely.
Chicago was his first stop. So, if he would have chose to go someplace else, you might have had a little bit of egg on your face. Nobody was expecting the lights of LeBron to come here. I don't think anybody even entertained that conversation.
I felt the same way in 2010 about LeBron. I already knew he wasn't going to come to Chicago. And it was amazing at that time how many Bulls fans were just holding out hope. I was like, he's not coming to Chicago.
Why would he not come to Chicago? Explain that one to me.
Well, 4 years ago, it was, he probably didn't feel the Bulls were in a position to give him a championship. Now it was because they just couldn't pay him his asking price.
But 4 years ago, actually, they could have gotten him. Think about it. If whoever's team he's on, you're winning a championship pretty
Definitely.
much with the right talent around you. The Bulls had the talent there.
Maybe LeBron didn't think so, though.
No, I think they had made that decision well before. And, I'm sure in hindsight he probably realized, I could have exactly what I did for Miami. I could have done the same thing to Cleveland. Now, here's the thing. Maybe he didn't realize the power and influence that he has, that everybody in the NBA is really interested in playing with him. Maybe back then he didn't realize the pull that he had. I'm sure after everything that's happened now, he knows he can get people, isn't this sad? He can get people to go play in Cleveland.
Definitely.
Quicker than we can probably get people to come and play in Chicago.
Because now they're talking about adding Ray Allen to Cleveland. Now, Obviously, Ray Allen, he's probably getting towards the end of his career too, but he's still a productive player. So imagine having that shooter off the bench just to complement everything else that they have out there.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see who LeBron can now attract to Cleveland, which will tell you that the league has totally shifted from being it is a player-centric league. It is not about the teams anymore. It is all about the players. And when you end up getting players to come play with you because of who you are, it's got nothing to do. It used to be people wanted to play for the Lakers. That was a big deal. People wanted to play for the Celtics. People wanted to play for the Knicks. Now it's about who is your marquee player because that's who I want to go because I feel like that person can help me get a ring.
What do you think about two players holding the league hostage for so long with this free agency?
I can't remember that ever happening ever. I mean, it's just amazing.
Here's the thing. ESPN has a lot to do with the culture with media.
So does social media.
And social media. The hype is so big now that media pushes things so much, you can't get away from it. So to me, that has a lot to do with it, how the media spoons, it spoons at you all the time consistently.
And not only that, the power of the hashtag.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how, a simple symbol on a keyboard, can just mean so much to millions of people through social media. I mean, I just remember watching free agency as a kid growing up in the 90s. It was a big deal, but not to the magnitude that it is now. It
was about the team. The team dynamic is totally secondary now. It's really about the players. So, yes, it was. I found it to be very annoying. And actually, I didn't even tune into it. I got most of my updates really via social media, I follow Bleacher Report and stuff like that.
Mobile alerts on my phone,
and I would get my mobile alerts. Oh, guess what? So DJ Augustin is no longer with Chicago. He's with Detroit. I only knew that because of my mobile alert. So I didn't follow it that way because I'm just not going to be held hostage where, these people are going. It is what it is. I knew where they weren't going. So with that being said.
You're a strong woman, Chica.
With that being said, I knew people weren't. I didn't even think Paul Gasol was going to come here. I really thought there was a strong possibility that he would end up in New York with Phil Jackson.
I thought that Paul Gasol was going to go to Oklahoma City, to be honest with you.
Another good fit.
The only two concerns that I have him actually. One, can he stay healthy because he has had some injuries recently?
Yes.
And two, last year with the Lakers, he put the team on his back when he really shouldn't have.
Right.
My fear is him trying too hard and not succeeding here in Chicago. Hopefully with the talent around him, that won't happen, but those are the two concerns that I have with Paul Gasol.
I think luckily for him, I think the Chicago locker room is very fair and balanced player-wise. I don't think that pressure will be there. To me, the natural-born leader in the locker room is Noah. He's the one that kind of picks up and does things and speaks, and I think he's comfortable in that role because that's not Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose does not like to have to be the mouthpiece for the team.
Derrick Rose, just give me the ball.
Yes, just give me the ball, let me do my thing. So the good thing is that Paul Gasol is not going to have to be that person. He's not in that kind of, desolate situation like he was in L.A. with high expectations. You're absent Kobe, so there's only so much. You weren't taking that team to a championship.
And now with Nikola Mirotic finally, making his way here, that'll probably push Gasol a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I definitely think the minutes will be distributed evenly between those two.
And I think, for them, that's a good tandem to have because obviously they're both Spaniards. So, I think for them that could be a good thing for both of them being on the team at the same time. Development-wise, especially for Mirotic, I think it'll be a good deal for him. So, you don't have to be distressed because, once again, the Bulls didn't get another big name in free agency because just look at this season. Team basketball is back via the Spurs. They showed you that you don't have to have that pure scorer all the time or multiple people because a lot of people bought into the Big Three concept because of what Miami did. But you see how that got debunked this year. And the Spurs are the reason that they probably could have won last year. And not to mention, Parker, Ginobili, and Duncan all took pay cuts in their most recent contracts to stay with the team because they believed in what they were trying to do. Exactly. So there are a lot of upsides to what the Bulls have. I'm a little concerned with the lack of the bench being soft again. That's why I was hoping that DJ Augustin would have stayed. You made a great point when we were at the break saying, hey, we all like Kurt Heinrich, but he's injury prone. He's not on the floor enough. So you have a young player in DJ Augustin. The best season he's ever had, he had in Chicago, but it might have a lot to do with the environment and the system itself. He thrived. Because like you said about Toronto, they didn't think he was worth the time of day. Right. But yet he came to Chicago and he really thrived. The bench has been really every single year, they're chipping away too much. There was a point of time where the Bulls could run the floor for a full game. So you could take out your starters and your bench would step in and you could still score and get good defense. Definitely. And they don't have that anymore. If nothing else, you looked at what the Spurs did, a solid bench is huge. And to me, that component is still missing. So DJ Augustin would have been good to keep around. Hopefully,
as they get closer to a training camp opening, we'll start to see all that play out, how that bench will come together. But for right now, the starting lineup's definitely looking good.
It does. And the other thing, too, is, Coach Thibodeau, I love him, but you can't run your starters to the ground. You're going to have to ease up, and that's why I'm hoping that you go get McDermott, because you believe that he's a good scorer, that you're going to give him the minutes to develop. He's got to be willing to give his rookies the minutes, and that's one thing he's always kind of been adverse to, is allowing them to get on the floor and make it happen.
You guys give me 2 teams to be in the championship next year.
You're asking that question in July?
Why not? You guys are pros.
Man, as much as I'd like to say I wouldn't be surprised if the Spurs were back.
I would agree. Come out of the West, I would go with the Spurs.
The Spurs, but, that all depends on how the rest of the conference gets better or worse around them.
And being healthy is key. If they can stay healthy, the duration of the season is big.
But the Eastern Conference, wow, with all the movement that's just happened in the Eastern Conference alone, it's really too hard to tell at this point. But I feel comfortable picking the Spurs, though, perhaps, from the West.
I'm going to go with the Spurs. The Bulls' chances are good as anybody else. If they can stay healthy as a team, their chance of advancing in the East, at this point, it's wide open. So it's about them staying healthy and Derrick Rose being able to stay on the floor for the full season. If he goes out again, you're right back to square one. You really, really are.
And that's what you don't need.
And that's what you don't need. Well, we're coming towards the close of the show. Thank you, Gabe Salgado, for co-hosting with me. Where can my listeners find you?
Follow me on Twitter at Gabe Salgado82. That's GABESALGADO82. I post everything there. I can also link you to all my Facebook and LinkedIn pages from there.
Good stuff. Thank you to
and we had good food tonight, right?
We did, from Gianna's Pizza. They dropped in food for us. Make sure you check them out online, giannaspizza.com, for good stuff. So thank you for feeding the crew. Thank you to Sidney Brown for stopping in and talking Blackhawks off-season moves. You can find him at SidKid80. He's from We Are Regal Radio. Thank you to Brian Crawford for bringing us up to speed with all the NBA free agency and talking Bulls as well. Thank you to Malcolm Rockhold, my technical producer, and Nadia Harald, who is actually my producer. See you next Sunday, same time, same place. We're out of here.